You're listening to the DCAU review, hosted by Cal and Liam and streaming on iTunes and at obpapparel.com.
Welcome to the inaugural DCAU review. I am Cal Renner. I am accompanied by a very popular podcaster and my co-host that will be a part of this journey as we move through the DC animated universe. My brother and close friend Liam. Liam, welcome to the first episode of the DCAU review.
I'm excited to be here. Thank you.
Well, I'm just shocked that we were able to get such a popular podcaster as yourself to borrow him from the famous TWL podcast. And I'm excited to start this thing with you. Obviously, known you for a fair amount of time, I'd say. And, we share this love of Batman animated, the Batman animated series all the way up through Justice League Unlimited. And we've been talking for a while about just doing kind of an episodic review going through the DC animated universe. And I'm pumped to start this with you, man.
Yeah, absolutely. It's these shows, I think if you are a comic book fan of any kind, if you watch every 2 weeks now, there's a superhero movie coming out at the movie theaters. Superheroes have never been more relevant or popular, and so I think if you for the gateway for a lot of nerds when they were young, if you were alive or if you were young during the era that any of these shows that we're going to talk about aired, this is probably your gateway drug, for lack of a better term.
Yeah, I agree with you. It's going back. Obviously, I was around. You weren't even born, obviously, when Batman the Animated Series debuted. I was about 4 years old. I can remember watching these in the afternoons on Fox when they were airing, and not even realizing the full depth, obviously, of the storylines, or even what most of these episodes mean or meant at the time, or what the subplots were, or other than Batman just kicking bad guy butt. It's hard to comprehend. It's so cool, and there have been thousands of pieces written on Batman the Animated Series and the relevance of it. So we're not going to go into all that, but just obviously the fact that they created such an amazing, iconic animated series. And we're able to not only write episodes that children would enjoy, but that hold up and that adults also can enjoy, with some very adult themes in a lot of these episodes, Lynn.
Yeah, absolutely. I think that's the hallmark of a show that lasts. And I mean, you think, and that doesn't just extend to these cartoons. And you think about something like a Pixar movie, like Toy Story or something, that when you're a child, you can watch it and enjoy it because it's fun and light enough and kind of silly. But when you get older and you go back and you watch it and you see themes of jealousy and regret and sadness and greed and things like that you maybe you wouldn't think to look for when you're 8 or 9 years old, but you can then go back and appreciate it on a whole nother level when you're a bit older. Absolutely. I think these cartoons are a great example of that.
Yeah, absolutely. They provide a cool commentary for stuff that was, a lot of social issues that are still relevant today. So as we go through this, we're going to go episode by episode and try and do this as regularly as our schedules allow. But I'm really pumped to start here with the very first episode of Batman the Animated Series. Not the first episode that aired, but the very first episode as far as chronologically. That they released here. So it's we're going to be discussing On Leather Wings today, and when we discuss it, we'll definitely throw in our opinion. This is our show, so we're going to be talking about the opinion, how we like the episode, maybe some cool fun facts if we find it, we're able to find any. But we'll be breaking it down and rating it. We're going to have a rating scale, Liam, that it's going to give people at home kind of our idea, and anybody that decides that and listening to us and that decides to listen to this podcast, we'd love to hear your thoughts on the episodes as well, and what your scoring for the episodes are. So we're actually going to break each episode down by a couple different categories. Liam, what are those categories?
We have four main categories. We have the plot, basic plot of the show, the animation, the music, and the voice acting. And if we have any other thoughts, we may occasionally add a fifth sort of bonus. Maybe we can add a few bonus points here and there if there's something that isn't covered in those four categories. But those are the same. Those are the main four. So basically, every show, to sum it up, will be from a scale of 0 to 40.
Cool. Awesome. So I am excited to talk about this specific episode. Obviously, this stands out when I think of the episodes of Batman animated series, probably because it's the first episode, Liam. That's why it's memorable, because it is the very first episode released. I remember even when buying the DVDs when they finally released the whole series on DVD, watching the episodes in order, and this episode kind of brings back a lot of memories watching it. It was one of the episodes when I was younger that was a little bit frightening. Deals with kind of a classic story of a mad scientist. They don't really tell you his motivation until 3/4 of the way through the episode itself. But it's an interesting episode for them to kick off on. The villain, of course, of the episode is Man-Bat. Liam, let's talk a little bit about the interesting choice that they decided to go with. Your very first episode, you have a Batman Rogues Gallery that is deep, and as we'll see as we go through these episodes, they go pretty deep into the Batman Rogues Gallery to pull out some villains that were a little more obscure. Of course, you have your regulars, but let's talk about Man-Bat as the first choice as a villain in this episode.
Yeah, I thought it was a really fascinating idea. Just because, I mean, as anyone who's seen this and is listening to this probably knows, these cartoons were pretty heavily influenced by the Tim Burton, Michael Keaton Batman and Batman Returns movies. So you might think, for your first episode, if you're pitching this to Fox and you're making a pilot, maybe you put the Catwoman and Penguin in it, since they were just recently used in the movies. Or you would perhaps use the Joker, who's maybe the most well-known comic book villain, period, even at that point. And it was coming off, a superstar like Jack Nicholson playing him just a few years prior. But they chose a sort of more obscure villain in Man-Bat, who had been used in the 70s and a little bit in the 80s in sort of some of the more classic Neil Adams, Denny O'Neil comic books. I don't want to get too nerdy on people here, but he wasn't.
That's okay. If anybody's listening to this podcast, they're nerds.
That's fair. So, I mean, he was absolutely a character, but he wasn't in what anyone would consider a mainstay of the Batman Rogues Gallery. If you go up to someone on the street, don't do that. If you go up to ask your friend, name a couple Batman villains, they'll name you Joker, Catwoman, maybe if they've seen the Dark Knight trilogy, maybe they'll name Bane or Scarecrow. But yeah, nobody out of the gate is going, oh, who my favorite Batman villain is? Man-Bat. No, yeah, so it was a very interesting choice.
Yeah, I would absolutely agree with you. I think it was definitely a risk, but they pulled it off the story itself, and really, I guess we'll jump right into our ratings here for different things. We'll start with the voice acting, because that's where I want to start with. To me, I think the voice acting sets this apart as far as an animated show and set the bar, especially for superhero animated shows going forward. If you compare this to the voice acting of any of the Marvel shows from the mid '90s, the really, really, really terrible Spider-Man and Iron Man and Fantastic Four episodes now that really don't hold up. I don't know if you've watched any of those within the last few years or so, but watching them is pretty painful.
Yeah.
Not just the low quality of the animation themselves, but the voice acting is just, it's so awful.
It absolutely changed the game, I think, when it comes to, they weren't just there to do a cartoon and collect their paycheck. And part of that might be the recording process, whereas most TV and movies, if you're doing animated projects, you record all of your actors separately. Whereas for the most part on Batman the Animated Series, the main cast of Batman and the villains and whoever else would record together. And I think that cannot be understated because it was allowing those actors to actually have a conversation with each other, to play off each other.
Yeah, absolutely. I totally agree with you. And it's funny now because if you go and you ask people who is Batman, like you have your conversations of actors, some people stand by Michael Keaton as their Batman. Of course, Ben Affleck has been the most popular choice recently with his portrayal. But
older generation would probably say Adam West.
Sure, yeah, absolutely. But you have a significant portion, and I don't know that you can say this about any other cartoon. You have a portion of people who will say Kevin Conroy is my Batman, because and that tells a lot to him, his ability to use just his voice too, because it's not it's his voice acting. You have people that say no. Kevin Conroy is the voice of Batman. He's been asked, which is why he's been asked to do it so many times, whether in additional DC animated movies that they've released in the last couple of years, the Batman Arkham games, he's done them. Kevin, you can't say that about any other. I don't know that you can say that about any other cartoon character that people would have been translated into live action, that people would say, have an argument and throw in the cartoon version of that and say, no, that's my Batman, or that's my character.
Yeah, absolutely. I think he's in a class by itself. I think a great litmus test is if you pick up a comic book and you see dialogue being spoken by Batman, whose voice do you hear in your head? That to me is the litmus test. And forever, when I read a comic book, Kevin Conroy's Batman voice is going to be what's in my head when Batman is speaking. And I don't know that you can pay him a higher compliment than that.
Absolutely. So for this episode specifically, Liam, I gave voice acting an 8 out of 10. I thought, first of all, kicking off the episode, which is sort of a little inside thing that we'll talk about eventually if we ever get to justice. But the very first voice that you hear, other than this police pilot, is Kevin Conroy. He's doing his sort of a goofy Bruce Wayne-esque voice as this other police pilot. But I always think that's a cool little cameo that one of the first voices you hear is Kevin Conroy's.
Yeah, no, that's a great little trivia factoid. And as you mentioned, eventually we'll get to Justice League Unlimited and Batman Beyond, and we can kind of talk about that further. But it becomes it's sort of like an iconic moment in and of itself. Just as you said, yeah. Who better than the voice of Batman to intro us to this first episode of the show?
But not as Batman. Go figure.
Exactly.
But I thought that, of course, his portrayal as both Bruce Wayne and Batman, and in this episode specifically, it introduces you into the difference. Dr. March calls him on the back computer phone, and he picks up and he goes into his real high-pitched, friendly Bruce Wayne voice, and then he goes right back to his Batman voice, which is his natural voice, which kind of goes to show you and speaks to that idea that this character, he is Batman. Bruce Wayne is the persona that he puts on. Yeah,
and I think that's in large part, and I've read interviews with Kevin Conroy where he said that was a very conscious choice for him. And I think that's an example of something that's then gone on to inform pretty much every version of Batman since then.
Certainly, yeah. From your Bale to your Affleck, the Batman voice is something that is definitely iconic. It's been parodied enough now, but you're right. That started with Kevin Conroy, really changing up the voice as a way to not only strike fear into the villains' hearts, I guess, but also really this interesting psychological dynamic that Batman is the person and Bruce Wayne is the persona that he portrays part-time. But Kevin Conroy's performance in this episode, just like most episodes, is untouchable. I really, really, really enjoyed Robert Costanzo's time as Harvey Bullock. Again, a character that you hear his voice. I liked your commentary there. When I read a comic book and Harvey Bullock is a part of it, I hear Robert Costanzo's voice as Harvey Bullock. His Harvey Bullock is iconic. it establishes this character as a kind of a goofball and maybe not the sharpest tool in the shed, but as somebody that is clearly a hardened officer of the law and is a character that is going to be established well into the series.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, you get it's a good way, and they do a pretty good job of introducing Batman's supporting cast very early on, whether that be Alfred or Commissioner Gordon or Bullock, and you can just, if you just hear their voices, the way they react, the way they talk, you kind of get a sense for who they are, and you absolutely get the sense that Bullock is the detective. He's kind of seen it all. He works in this cesspool of a city. And he doesn't really like the idea of a vigilante being in his city, so he's just kind of looking for a reason to go after Batman.
Yeah, it's an interesting dynamic. He has the ability, and there are episodes later on that kind of lend to that narrative as well, that he's willing to bend the rules on certain things, but he doesn't like the idea of somebody that's not deputized by the law to bend the rules on their own. In the case of Batman. But it's interesting. This episode starts the sort of Batman Bullock arc that we see throughout the series. Bullock not really being a fan of Batman here, but of course we see that the evolution of that carry on throughout the series. But this is a good way to establish them butting heads initially as he leads this task force basically to try and kill Batman.
Yeah.
I thought also along the same lines with Bullock's interaction, his interaction with Bob Hastings, Commissioner Gordon this episode also sets up a good dynamic between those two characters of Gordon, the guy that is a fan of Batman, who can't come out and fully support him because of his position, but it can do what he can in his position to try and protect Batman, and he and Bullock bump heads a lot in this episode.
Absolutely. I think that really sets the tone. You know very quickly, if you just watch this first episode, who these people are and what their kind of basic convictions are. And Gordon's a guy who just feels like man, I'm drowning. I'm in over my head here, and so we need help. We need this guy.
Yeah, certainly, absolutely. What did you think of the voice acting in the show? What'd you give it?
I gave it an 8 as well, ironically. I just thought I was really impressed, and like we've been talking about for several minutes now, it's just everybody that needed to play their parts, for the most part, get in and get out, tell us your motivation, and sound convincing in the lines that you're giving. Just about everybody was pretty much on point here.
With the exception of one character.
Yes, that would be the first few episodes. Earl Bowen, I believe is the man's name, played Alfred Pennyworth for the first maybe 5 episodes, 4 or 5. And just if you know Ephraim Zimbalist Jr., who did him for most of the show and came back and played him on Justice League and other animated movies and such, when you hear just a different voice, it's just so jarring. And he's a lot more he sounds very old and very kind of slow, and
yeah.
So no offense to the man, I'm sure he's a nice guy, but compared to the sort of warmth and sort of confidence and that Alfred would later bring to the show, and sort of the guy along with Robin and with Commissioner Gordon, who sort of brings Batman back from the abyss. Going from that to this sort of very, very different take on Alfred, it's super jarring.
Very different take. That's a very kind way to put that. Yeah, I put in my notes. I put in my notes. Alfred sucks. That was the that was what I put under my notes for voice acting. Yeah, I would have given it 10 out of 10. Also, like you said, I don't think that the performance itself was bad. I just think that he wasn't Alfred. It was interesting to me that they never went back, and I guess there would have been production costs and stuff, but they never went back and had them re-recorded it to Ephraim Zimbalist Jr. re-record it, just so that it didn't stand out as much as it did. It sounds like Alfred has a cold or something. Like that's yes. That's what I picture it as, I guess. But yeah, you're right. It's a little it's a little rough. But one thing I do want to touch on while we were talking about these characters, you mentioned it before, but one of the most interesting things that I thought that this episode does, and I put this under the things that I liked about this, Liam, was they didn't show Batman for the very first 5 minutes of the episode, which when you're starting a children's show about Batman, it's a very interesting choice to make not to show Batman for those first 5 minutes. But then it did give the series the opportunity to establish some of these characters, like we already talked about with Commissioner Gordon and Harvey Bullock, as characters that have a lot of depth and that really let the audience know that, yes, this is a Batman show, but the characters around him aren't just hollow pieces. We're gonna build these guys' stories themselves. We're gonna give them some depth and really make these guys just as important as Batman himself.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I think if you look at the Keaton movies or even, the old 60s show, which obviously is a completely different animal, but I mean, Commissioner Gordon and his various, police chiefs or detectives that he worked with in those shows and movies were generally just kind of not necessarily bumbling, but not particularly capable. They're just kind of, the villain gives his demands to the police and the police immediately have to call Batman to come solve them. And, you get the impression that they would have trouble. They might have trouble, going to the bathroom by themselves. Like it's more Batman. It's Batman working with them to make the city better rather than them just sort of sucking their thumbs and crying for Batman whenever the villain of the week comes calling.
That's very true. That's a good point. Yeah, and it really led to the ability to have episodes later on in the series that kind of focused more on these characters and their arcs rather than just every episode is about Batman and how messed up Batman is and him kicking villain butt. Like it really allows you to build a sort of universe that allows you to create character depth. It's not one dimensional. It's not just about Batman. It's not just about Batman fighting bad guys. There's real humans involved in this city. It really adds another dimension to Gotham City as a whole.
Absolutely. Agreed.
Moving on, so we covered our voice acting, both 8 out of 10 for voice acting. We'll go on to an easy one here. Let's talk about music. What did you think about the music for this episode?
I think there's a couple of times where the music really adds a lot. I think the opening theme, right away you get strings and a very ominous feeling. So the opening music that plays over the title card, and then sort of as the beginning, as they're showing kind of sweeping through shots of buildings with Man-Bat's silhouette flying, his shadow, I suppose, flying next to them. I thought it adds a lot to the atmosphere. The music was actually composed by a woman named Shirley Walker, who was used by Danny Elfman, obviously the iconic Batman theme, which you hear in the Keaton movies, and then was used for the main title of the animated series.
Yeah, it's for me. So what was your ranking for that? What did you give it? Your final score?
Actually, I gave the music a 7 because I thought it swelled, and as far as setting up sort of an ominous tone, and again, kind of showing that this isn't the Hanna-Barbera cartoons. This isn't Super Friends. This is legitimate. There's orchestral music being played. I thought it added a lot to the atmosphere. So I gave it a 7.
Cool. 7 out of 10. Awesome. So I'm going to disagree with you just a little bit. I think that you are spot on with the Batman theme. We didn't even talk about the initial Batman theme, but the Batman theme itself and even the introduction to the show sets the tone for this program itself. The scene of the bank exploding and the Batman and the introduction to each episode is really iconic in and of itself. And really, it's interesting that at the time, not a lot of animated shows were doing more than just kind of a mishmash of clips from different episodes as the introduction, if they were doing an intro at all to the show. And Batman set itself apart by doing its own animated short, essentially, as the introduction to the show, and really set the tone. And but honestly, for this episode, music overall, with the exception of the scene that you mentioned, the very beginning, from the title card up to the scene, the blimp going through the clouds, and then the scene where Batman is attached to Man-Bat and they're flying through the construction site. I really, the music just kind of blended into me. It didn't really stand out very much in other spots. I felt like it was kind of an afterthought. There was no memorable theme as we go through these episodes. About some of the themes, the theme music that different people have. Obviously, Robin has his own theme. The Joker has his own theme. Two-Face, Catwoman, these characters have their own themes. Mm-hmm. Batman, Man-Bat himself, I guess, wasn't a prominent enough player to get a theme song that really stands out and remember, that is easy to remember. And those other characters are featured in multiple episodes, so maybe that's why those stand out to me as opposed to this episode. But I gave the music in this episode a 3 out of 10 just because, like I said, with the exception of the intro to the show itself and the scene, the fantastic, phenomenal scenes we're going to talk about in the animation portion of Batman being attached to Man-Bat himself, I really didn't notice the music at all, and didn't really think it added much to the episode. All right, so for that, so far, voice acting, we both gave it 8 out of 10. For the music, you gave it 7 out of 10. I gave it a 3 out of 10. Moving on to animation itself. So my brief thoughts on this. The animation is fine. I think that as we go on through the episodes, this will probably be better ones. There are a couple right at the beginning that the animation is a little iffy. The only things that stood out to me that I thought took me out of the episode a little bit, there were a lot of scenes where they chose the camera to sort of be far away from what was going on. It was sort of like a panoramic view of the scene. Mm-hmm. And because of that, the details on the animation itself were very bland. They were very blocky. And it's hard because we don't have an HD. They haven't released an HD copy of the Batman animated yet. I know they're planning on doing that soon. But when something's very low quality, it's not HD quality, and you're watching it on a bigger screen, and you can kind of see that the drawings don't have that much detail. It seemed to me there was a number of scenes where it was just that panoramic view, and the characters looked very blotchy. They didn't have a lot of detail drawn on them because it's a faraway view, and at times I thought that the animation was even super cartoony. The part of the episode where the SWAT team gets out of the they're all running out and they're like that animation there, the guys look super weird. Dr. March, I thought, sort of resembled the Penguin a little bit. I didn't necessarily like his character design. It was an interesting choice. He had a very pronounced nose and those same shaped eyes that the Penguin has.
Yeah,
I thought.
And I think part of that design, goes to they wanted to make a creepy guy for the misdirection that he was going to be the guy that turned out to be Man-Bat. So I think they sort of just went sort of a generic, more mad scientist look, whereas Kirk Langstrom looks like a J. Crew fashion model. But that's
a good point.
So he did kind of creepy old guy to turn out to be the monster.
Yeah. Yeah, he kind of looked like a little Igor-ish, I guess, is the look they were going for. But I thought that leads to the Langstroms. I thought the Langstroms looked fine. Kurt is the last person you'd probably think that could be the Man-Bat. Just like you said, based on what you said, he looks kind of like a suave dude. I thought that the transformation, when they finally reveal Langstrom turning into Man-Bat, was phenomenal, especially for the time, the technology that they have to use. It's sort of a little slow-mo, so it kind of takes away a little bit, but I thought that the ability to take this human form, and how are you going to turn this into a bat and not make it look completely not?
Yeah, agreed. There's some of the transformations, if you compare this to, say, the one that really sticks out to my mind, which we'll get to later, would be the Clayface transformations they did later on, which are just phenomenal.
Yeah.
If you have that in mind, yeah, this comparatively is not on that level, but it gives you that very creepy feel. His voice changes very slowly, and you sort of, you see his ears change. They didn't do the transformation off screen, which I think, for animation reasons, may have been a cheaper choice, a more economic choice, but they did at least show you sort of the basic transformation of his skin changing, his ears growing larger, his fangs growing in. I think they did enough, but yes, compared to some of the later work they were able to do with a character like Clayface, or some of the stuff they did with Scarecrow, and some of the fear toxin hallucinations. Yeah, this one is probably not as impressive if you know what's coming with the rest of the show.
Sure. Yeah, I thought they did a good job. It was interesting because there's a couple points of this episode. I'm not an anime guy, but just comparing some of the DC animated movies that have come out recently in the past several years have been more on that anime style, and the close-ups of his teeth kind of changing into fangs, and even one of the scene with the SWAT team where they threw the grenade. There's an up close of one of the guys' mouths. It really reminded me that they had taken some stuff, lifted some stuff from some of that Japanese animation, which was kind of leading the way and creating innovation at the time. But yeah, I'm sure they borrowed some of that stuff from that. To me, the scene that stands out the most, and when I was watching it today, I paused it and rewound it because I was like, wow, that was incredible. The scene where Batman is attached to Man-Bat's foot, and it's after he kind of smashes into the blimp, but he's attached to him, and they go through the construction scene. The way that he flies through, and then the camera pans while Batman is holding on to it, kind of gives us 3-dimensional look to the scene. I thought that was just amazing. Like I couldn't believe. I was like, this is something. Yeah, go ahead.
Yeah, even the minor details, like the way Batman's cape flows during that is really well done. It's very fluid. And animating cloth like that, I'm sure, is a painstaking and not fun process. But
absolutely, yeah. That scene in and of itself was the top scene. Really stood out for me. Like I said, I don't know how much they were borrowing from anime and using the Japanese animators that they were using, but I thought that scene, just the fact that there's so many twists and turns, and Batman does a kind of like a loop-de-loop, and it's fantastic. If you watch one scene from this episode, I would recommend that one.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, there's a scene right at the start of the chase where they have the moon in the background, and Man-Bat flies up and then goes down, and so Batman's kind of following him, and the rope is looping with him. It's so well done.
Yeah, absolutely. So I ended up giving the animation a 6 out of 10, just because I said some of the stuff was a little goofy. Like I said, the SWAT team I thought was a little goofy. They did a good job. That Batman scene, honestly, without that scene, I think I probably would have given maybe a 4 or 5. But that scene in and of itself knocked it up a whole point for me. What about you?
Yeah, I gave it an 8 out of 10. I really, again, I think it's that the kind of opening bit of the atmosphere building as they're sweeping through all the buildings with Man-Bat at the beginning of the show. And then the transformation scene, and just like a little thing where Man-Bat, he first turns into Man-Bat in front of Batman and is about to attack him, and then Kirk Langstrom's wife walks into the room, and Man-Bat looks at her, and like his ears go down. Like we both have dogs. We've caught them probably going to the bathroom in the house at some point, and that's the look that Man-Bat gives to his wife. It's like, damn it, you caught me trying to kill Batman.
Right.
But I thought there was a lot of little flourishes in the reactions. Batman's reaction to the transformation. Some of that I think really added to it. And then as you very eloquently put it with everything you went over for the sort of final battle, I totally agree. I totally see what you're saying with the points about some of the middle part of the episode, but I thought, again, the beginning and then the transformation and all the way to the end of the episode are just really solid. So absolutely. I was a big fan of this.
Cool. All right, so animation. So animation, you gave 8 out of 10, and I gave a 6 out of 10 on that. So finally, our last point is the plot. Liam, what did you think of the plot?
It's basically it's impressive because most of these stories are standalone as we go through the animated series. As we got into some of the other shows going forward with Superman and Batman Beyond, and certainly with Justice League, we sort of saw more overarching plots that would take whole seasons to unfold. But here it was very much a contained. It's 22 minutes. They got in and got out. It wasn't like super spectacular, as you mentioned early on. It's very much sort of the mad scientists,
Right.
tampering with the laws of nature. It's very basic.
Mm-hmm.
It's very much a sort of a sci-fi horror thing they're going for. And I mean, I think it works, and it works for again, this episode had a lot to do. So the overall plot, I wouldn't say is spectacular, but it's serviceable. I think that's maybe the word I would use for it.
That's good. That's a good way to put it. I think the good of it was the fact that there was a mystery. You talked about in the animation choices, the misdirection with, who is Man-Bat? Is it this creepy doctor that is acting all shady? That doesn't want to. That's clearly lying to Batman. So the misdirection and the mystery as to who the identity of Man-Bat, I thought was good. That's always a good plot point. The motivation, I think, for the villain itself, I thought that was one of the weakest points. Was they don't really give you a reason why Kirk Langstrom decided to do this, other than he kind of wants to be ahead of the curve of evolution, I guess, and experiment that Dr. March had considered doing, but he was too scared, so I'm going to go ahead and do it. And his motivation was kind of unclear as to why would dude, if you have this smoking hot wife and you're a successful scientist, why would you do this other than you just want to there was no reward for him to do this, other than maybe living longer. Yeah,
I mean, to me, it's sort of like Man-Bat sort of takes cues from the Lizard, the Spider-Man villain, but at least in that way, you had the character who had lost his arm, and so he was experimenting with the lizard gene to try to regrow limbs and help not only himself but help potentially everyone that's ever had an appendage amputated. Whereas this one, he's just like, I kind of just want to turn myself into a bat.
Right.
Yeah. Like, I don't know. I think it would be cool.
Right. Yeah, this sounds cool. I want to be the guy that did it, not my idiot father-in-law. Okay.
And I think they actually handled this better, and we can get into this a lot more later, with when Batman Beyond did the splicing thing.
Oh yeah.
Where they sort of introduced characters who it's almost more treated as a drug or something, where guys, you splice a little bit, so it's a human woman with with the sense of smell of a rodent or something. Like that kind of stuff makes a little more sense than just literally turning yourself into a giant bat, I think.
Yeah. Yeah, I thought that took away a little bit from the episode. The other thing that I didn't necessarily like was I felt like the Man-Bat himself was very easily defeated. Batman covered his eyes and he flew into a wall. And then he's apparently incapacitated enough for Batman to somehow get him into either the Batplane or the Batmobile, drive him all the way to the Batcave, still knocked out, and to on the Batcave examining table. And then Alfred asks him pretty quickly if there's a way to reverse it, and it's kind of solved off screen that Batman figures out. They don't really go into depth how he figured out. There's like a little scanning thing done by the Bat computer, and then voila, he's back to being Kirk Langstrom and the stuff's out of his system. So I felt like it was resolved a little bit too easily. I get it; it's a 22-minute episode of a kid's what ultimately is supposed to be a kid's show. So some of it you kind of have to grin and bear it. It's not a feature-length film, but I just felt like it was resolved a little too easily.
Yeah, I think that's fair. It is very much a Deus Ex Machina type of thing where he defeats him and then just like, yep, he does all of the science. I mean, they do at least do a decent job of showing that Batman is a detective in this show. In fact, it shows how incompetent
Sure.
the Gotham City Police CSI department is, as they miss the tape recorder with Man-Bat's howl on it, and miss like 5 bat hairs.
Giant bat hairs. In their defense, they didn't have the red goggles and spray that Batman.
That's right. Batman just comes and puts goggles on and starts spraying something, and all of a sudden he can find everything. But I mean, it's yeah. So you do establish that he's a detective here. You don't do a great job of showing Batman or Bruce Wayne as a scientist here. But because as you mentioned, he pretty much just like you could have just. It may have even been better if they had just said, well, the effects were only temporary and he turned back on his own, and then maybe you could put that in the back of everyone's mind of maybe the Man-Bat will be back one day. Is it inside? Is the serum still inside of him? Can he change whenever he wants? Kind of make it more of like a Dr. Jekyll, Mr. Hyde thing. But they kind of just decided, nope, he's cured.
Nope, he's cured. All is well. All contained in one episode. Yeah, that was an interesting choice. What was your score for the plot?
Yeah, I gave it a 5 out of 10. Again, nothing horrible. I still very much enjoyed it. As I think if you've listened to our show here, we definitely have more good to say about it than bad by far. But it's very, like you said, I think it's just by the numbers. And as we covered, they had to do a lot. They had to introduce sort of the whole supporting cast and sort of establish Batman himself. And so there was basically, if you only have 22 minutes, that's your first 16 minutes or so are doing that. And with sort of the subplot of the police going after Batman because they think he's responsible, there's really only, they're like, okay, we got 4 minutes to have them fight and for Batman to cure him and the end credits.
Right.
So,
yeah, the ending felt just a little rushed for me. So you gave it a 5 out of 10. I gave it a 6 out of 10 just because, again, I think there were some good things. But as far as does it measure up against some of the better episodes of the show? No, I think it's iconic because it is the very first episode.
Sure.
If this had been placed, further down the release dates, the chronologically released a little bit later on, I don't know that it would have as great nostalgia feels as it has for us watching it today. But it is the very first episode, so it certainly has a special place.
Yeah, and I do think there's something to be said for the fact that they kind of just jump right into everything. You don't see Bruce's parents die, which. And that's not just a Batman thing when it comes to movies or cartoons. It's kind of you always have to start with the origin story for the most part. And in DC and Marvel movies, you got to show Krypton blowing up if you're doing a Superman movie. You got to show Uncle Ben dying if you're doing a Spider-Man show or movie. So just the fact that they basically jumped in, they're like, okay. I mean, that opening title card that we mentioned there, the title sequence, that kind of gives you all you need to know about Batman. It's like, bad guys are going to show up. He's going to drive the Batmobile to go get them. He's going to confront them. He's going to look awesome, and he's going to beat them up. Like you very much get, this is who this guy is. This is what he does. This is how he looks, all in, 15 or 20, 25, 30 seconds.
Anything else you want to cover? Anything else good or bad that stood out to you?
I mean, again, I think it's just fun to look at how this is the origins of something that really came to influence everything that came after it, whether that be superhero cartoons, superhero movies, or the comic books themselves. I think it really cannot be understated how influential the Batman the Animated Series and Bruce Timm and Eric Radomski and Paul Dini and many others were, as far as adding teeth to certain people, adding backstories to characters. We'll certainly get to say something like Mr. Freeze, who's just sort of a generic villain up to the point. Or obviously the biggest glaring example is the introduction of Harley Quinn, who is a phenomenon now.
Absolutely. Yeah.
So I think it's really, and it is fun to look at all of the stuff that's come since then. It all started here. It all started with On Leather Wings. Like that's that I think is why this is, as you mentioned, if this wasn't first, it might not hold a special place in so many fans' hearts, but because it is, you have to sort of, it's the pioneer. It's the pioneer of almost everything. It's the founding father of not only the entire DC animated universe, but of many different mediums that have come since.
Certainly, yeah. So this has been fun, awesome. So we've got one in the books. We're looking hopefully to have one out in the next couple of weeks after this. Do this fairly regularly as our schedules will allow, but this has been fun. If you guys enjoyed this, we'd love to get your feedback. You can find us on Twitter right now. We're at DCAU Review. You can feel free to tweet us any feedback. We'd love to hear your thoughts on Leather Wings, what you thought of the episode itself. Does it hold up? What was your score? What did you think about the plot, animation, music, and voice acting, and anything else that you think stands out about it or Batman the Animated Series as a whole? So we'll catch you guys next time. We appreciate you listening to the very first episode of the DCAU Review. I'm Cal.
And I'm Liam.
We'll catch you guys next time.
Bye-bye.